Hi. So the purpose of our second video is to help you install Ubuntu inside VirtualBox. Don't worry too much about VirtualBox at this point. As you start to use VirtualBox, what it does will just become apparent to you. Let's just focus mostly on Ubuntu itself. And all Ubuntu is an operating system like Windows or Mac OS. So what we're doing is setting up a computer that should look a lot like your own laptop or computer, except that it'll be running Linux, and you may have worked only with Windows or Mac OS before. So this might look a little different. Let's see how it turns out. You want to start by going to Ubuntu's website, which is www.ubuntu.com. And when you're at the site, we want to click on the download menu, and that'll bring you some options that look like these. We want to download the desktop edition. It is a little bit larger download, but it will help us as we're learning Ubuntu. At the competition, we may use the server edition. The main difference really is just that the server edition doesn't have a graphical interface. You interact with it only through the command line. It's a little more secure that way. But for now, let's download Ubuntu Desktop. Just click on the 2204 LTS, which is the current stable edition of Ubuntu Desktop, and we should get a pop-up. There we go. It says we're going to download this. Now, you might notice right away that this says it's a pretty big download, 3.5 gigabytes. So this might take a little while. While it's downloading, I will cut the video and just start it back up once my download has completed here. But you definitely want to do this before we start to set things up in VirtualBox because we won't get very far without this. Okay, you can see that my download of Ubuntu has finished now. And so I'm going to switch over to VirtualBox, which I've already got running. And you can see I've got a couple other other instances of Ubuntu that I've installed that are already out here, but I'll show you how to install a new one. The one way to do this is to hop up to the machine menu and to choose new, and that will start a little mini wizard of sorts that'll let you pick different properties of your virtual machine. And so I have, for whatever reason, started naming these machines after small towns near Cedar Rapids. So this one, I guess, can be Swisher. And you can leave the machine folder the same as what it suggests unless you have a reason to move it someplace else. Now you're going to need to change this type to be Linux. Otherwise, somebody ran into this last week, and I actually did also. If you miss this and leave it as Windows and you hit this drop down and you're trying to find Ubuntu, it won't be on here. It's all just different kinds of Linux or of Windows, excuse me. It's all just different kinds of Windows. So be sure you hit the type, change it to Linux, and then you'll have all these different kinds of Linux to pick from. Scroll down and choose Ubuntu 64-bit and then hit next. The next screen asks you how much memory you want to allocate to your virtual computer. It also gives you a little bit of a color indication of how much memory VirtualBox thinks is safe to allocate to virtual computers on your computer. Now, since we're only going to be running the single virtual computer at first, go ahead and give it 4096, which is 4 gigabytes, if that's safe, if that's in the safe zone for your host computer. And if not, try to give it at least 2 gigabytes. That would be 2048. I think everybody should be able to do that, and then click Next. And the last main part of the wizard, unless I'm forgetting something, is this part that asks you to describe for VirtualBox what kind of virtual hard disk you want on the virtual PC. Now, there are times when you have your own virtual hard disk that you're bringing or something like that, so you wouldn't need to create one right now. In our case, we do want to create a new one, so make sure that second option is selected and click Create. before the actual creation happens, VirtualBox needs to ask you a few questions. The first one is asking about what type of hard disk file, what type of virtual disk do you want to create? We don't care about this at this point in time. Later in the year, I may explain to you what these three different file types or disk formats are and why it might matter, but right now we don't care. So just leave it at VDI, which is VirtualBox's native format, and that is the default, and just click Next. Now this screen has a very important option on it. You definitely want to choose dynamically allocated and not choose fixed size. And the reason for this is that VirtualBox is going to create a file on your real computer, on your host computer's file system, and that file is going to contain the contents of your virtual computer's hard disk. Now, if you choose fixed size and then make a, say, 30 gigabyte virtual disk for your virtual computer, VirtualBox will allocate a 30 gigabyte disk file right away. And so you'll lose 30 gigabytes of capacity on your drive right away. And so if we go ahead and have you build out, 4 of these machines and they all have 30 gigabyte hard drives, you will lose 120 gigabytes of space on your hard drive. So, I mean, do the math. This is not going to be good over the course of the season, right? So instead, you want to choose dynamically allocated. And all that means is that VirtualBox is going to start with that file that represents your virtual computer's hard disk. That file is going to be really tiny when it's first created. And then as you add things to the operating system in the virtual computer, that file is going to grow and just always be big enough, just barely big enough to hold whatever you put on the virtual computer. So if that doesn't all make sense, I can break it down as dynamically allocated starts small, fixed size starts big. We want it to start small. So choose dynamically allocated and click next. This screen that is labeled file location and size is going to define the maximum size to which your virtual hard drive can grow. 10 gigabytes is kind of thin, 20 is safe. I'm going to put down 30. I think that's a good number to put in here. And it shouldn't really matter since we've chosen a dynamically allocated disk. If we define all of our virtual computers to go to 30 or 40 or 50 or whatever, as long as they're not all using a lot of disk space, well, the dynamically allocated disk will only grow to be as large as whatever we put into Linux. So if I only consume 10 gigabytes or 15 or 20, it doesn't really matter that I tell VirtualBox that this thing can get to be as large as 30. It will only grow to be 30 gigabytes if I actually use the full 30 gigabytes. So I'm going to say 30, and then I'll click Create. And that's actually all that I have to do to define this virtual computer. You can see now that this thing is powered off. We haven't turned it on yet. It's powered off. If you look on the right, you can see the name is Swisher. The operating system is Ubuntu. Now, don't let that confuse you. All that means is that VirtualBox has set up a computer that's compatible with the Ubuntu operating system. It did not install Ubuntu. We have to do that. You can see base memory is 4 gigabytes. It has 3 devices it can boot from, a floppy drive, oh my goodness, an optical drive, which is like a DVD drive, and a hard disk. It's got some details about virtualization and whatnot there. Video memory, pretty thin, just a lot of other details here. There are some other things that we're going to want to change right away before we start up. Now you can see that the optical drive here under storage is listed as empty, and we want to take that Ubuntu installation image that we downloaded from ubuntu.com, and we want to mount it in the optical drive. It's basically the same thing as if we had a DVD. It's the same thing as putting it into the optical drive. And so to do that, we're going to click where it says optical drive empty and say that we want to choose a disk file. Now that will open up a file chooser interface, and you might not pop up in your downloads folder like I did, so you might have to go and find it. But once you are in your downloads folder or wherever you saved that Ubuntu file, just select it and choose open. And just like that, you have virtually inserted this file, which represents a DVD, into this virtual DVD drive. So now, since the optical drive is one of our boot devices, the boot order has optical drive in the second spot, and we don't have a floppy disk, this will actually be what we boot from. So that's cool. But if that's all we did at this point, we can start the computer, but this will probably fail for you. It does fail for me, and I want to show you what happens. It's not your fault if this happens. So I'll just click the start arrow at the top, and I'm going to clear these messages at the top when they happen. And this is when Ubuntu would usually start to run, but in this case, we get a mess. Now we can talk about what this mess means some other day, but one thing you see are these words, whoops, sorry about that. One thing you see are these words, kernel panic, right? This is basically the same thing as a blue screen of death on Windows, or the lovely gentle screen of death that Mac OS has. Now this is a little bit tricky to figure out, but I have seen something like this in VirtualBox quite a while back, and because of that I was able to find a solution on Google. And let me just close this window, which this is kind of like pulling the power cord on this virtual computer. I'm going to X out, and then I'm going to say, yeah, don't save anything, just shut the thing off, and poof, it's off, just like just like we powered it off. And there's a bug in VirtualBox, at least that's the way I see it. And to fix this, here's what we have to do. Click on the settings icon at the top and go to the system tab on the left side there. And what we want to do is to click on the processor tab, and where it says it has one processor, we want to give it two. That's all we have to do. Just change from one processor to two and everything will be great. So let me go ahead and start this again just to show you that this will actually work. There's the VirtualBox splash screen. Here's Grub. And so I'll just go ahead and manually launch Ubuntu. And now you can see that we are not getting a kernel panic. We're getting a lovely Ubuntu screen. And in a few seconds, this will start up the Ubuntu shell. There we go. There's our, what is it, Jammy Jellyfish, I think, for Ubuntu 22.04. And we get a very loud noise. That hurt my ears a little. You can see that you do have the two different options to try Ubuntu or to install it. We want to install it, so we'll go ahead and click that. Now the biggest problem, and really probably the only problem that you have during this installation, is that you won't be able to see the bottom halves of these buttons. You can see down at the bottom, quit, back, and continue, and they will still be accessible. You just can't quite get to the whole button. It's a little unnerving, but it's not really a problem. Okay, so first thing we're asked to check is our keyboard layout. Ubuntu has actually detected mine correctly as English US for my language and my keyboard. I'll click continue. This next screen asks us some very general questions about the installation. Go ahead and tell it that you want to do a normal installation and that you would like to download updates during the installation and that you would like to install third-party software for graphics and Wi-Fi hardware. I'm not sure that we need that last one, but I do think it helps with something that we install later. And then once you've got those selected, click Continue. Now this screen is asking you what you'd like to do in terms of your disk configuration. This is the low-level configuration. Some of you may have experience with this of choosing partitioning and things like that for your physical disk. Now, the thing to remember is that we aren't working with a physical disk right now. We're working with a fake disk that's attached to a fake computer. So when we see warnings that say things like, this will delete all your programs, documents, photos, music, and any other files in all operating systems, it means on your fake disk that's attached to your fake computer. So we don't really have to worry about that. In fact, we made this fake disk specifically to install Ubuntu on. There's nothing on it right now. So the thing we really want to do is leave this first option selected because installing Ubuntu is the only thing we want to do on here. So that's fine. It's not scary because we're on a fake computer. So we'll go ahead and leave that first one selected and say install now. And it will show us a message that has some real geeky information about what's going to happen with the partitions. We don't need to understand that right now. So we'll just click continue. And right now it is setting up those disk partitions and it's actually starting the installation. I don't know if you noticed, but that last button actually said install. I should have called that out. It's detected roughly where I am, so it's asking me to verify that I'm in the same time zone as Chicago, which I am. Okay, on this screen you get to pick a username for yourself and a computer name. So I'm going to call myself Christopher L on this one. And for some reason, they want my computer to be called Christopher L-VirtualBox. That's not a bad default, but I've already decided to call this one Swisher, so I will do that. Username of Christopher L. And then a quick note on passwords. Don't use your real life passwords here. We're not going to do anything on these fake computers that you really need to protect. And there's a good chance that your teammates or I will see your password or maybe even need to see your password, or you might see mine just because we're typing and we accidentally click on the little eyeball and it shows it on the screen or something like that. We're not going to put anything on these computers that will compromise your identity if it gets seen. And likewise, we don't want you to put a real password that you use on a real website on these computers because we might see them accidentally. So don't do that. So I'm going to use a real poor password here. And that's not even it. Okay, I think that's right. And that's it. I'll click continue. And while I've been yakking away at that, hopefully this has been making some progress. It has. And so I'll cut the video now and come back when the installation has completed. Okay, so you can see that the installation of Ubuntu has finished on my virtual computer. Installation's complete. It says it wants to restart, so I'll go ahead and click restart now. You're going to get an odd prompt here that says you're supposed to remove the DVD from the optical drive. If you wanted to do this, the way you would do it would be to click on devices, and you can see lots of devices listed here, virtual devices. And the optical drive has a menu, and you can actually remove a disk from the virtual drive, but that's grayed out. If I click on it here, nothing happens. And that's because VirtualBox has automatically ejected the drive for you. So even though Ubuntu is saying, hey, please eject this disk, that's already happened. All you really have to do is click enter and the box will reboot for you. And this time it will boot up normally, which means it will show a screen where your user can log in. Here you see my user Christopher L that I defined during the setup process, and I just have to remember that password. There it is, and there's Ubuntu. Now the last little bit I want to do in this video is just talk you through this initial screen. If you were setting this up to be your Ubuntu desktop, you would probably want to fill these things out. You would probably want to do Ubuntu single sign-on for a reason that will be on a following screen. If you connect Google and Microsoft, I think you get calendar integration with that. I can't remember for sure. Probably you wouldn't be using Nextcloud. I've used it. It's no big deal. I'm going to skip that right now. Live Patch is the reason you might want to have that Ubuntu, what they call it, Ubuntu single sign-on. Live Patch is a really good thing. It lets Ubuntu patch some software when it needs patching without rebooting, so they can actually do things like patch the Linux kernel while it's up and running. I think that you need the Ubuntu single sign-on account to set up Live Patch. Not sure about that, but ordinarily we would set this up. I'm going to skip it right now. And then there's an opt-in screen for whether or not you want to send them information about your computer. They even let you see what the first report looks like. I'm going to skip that right now as well. There's an opt-in for using location services. I'm actually going to turn that one on. And then there's some information about their app store and different programs you can install there. So that's all that is. And I'm going to stop this video now, and I have to edit it and take out a lot of sections where I got stuck or said too much. So that's it for now. Talk to you soon.